Hi, folks. Rob Goller here. Thanks for joining me for the weekly chat about local history. Appreciate the support of this project as always. This week we want to discuss. I want to discuss some question that came up, and it came up a couple times, and then most recently came up again about zip codes and how long we've been using zip codes. There are people around, quite a few people actually, who remember a time when we did not use zip codes when we were mailing a letter or mailing correspondence somewhere or a package to a family member at Christmas time. Um, we didn't have to include the zip code, just the post office or the town would suffice. And the reason this came up is we were doing some research into old postcards and there was somebody collecting postcards. And the question came up because in the old days, the postcards only included the town. So the name and the town. And then as we got to more modern time, mid 20th century, there would be the name, the street address, and the town. In the early days, you could get away with putting someone's name and just their post office, the town they lived in, the village they lived in, and it would get there. And everyone picked up their mail. There wasn't delivery, so just putting the name in the post office was enough, and the postmaster of or the postal workers at that post office would be able to get it delivered when that person came in. They would have mailboxes or a system within the post office. They didn't need to know their street address because they would come in and pick up their mail. As delivery started happening, you would have the need for street addresses. And we had talked about that a couple weeks ago about house addresses becoming an issue in the 1920s as more routes were being delivered rather than picked up, and they needed a system of addresses that made sense in order because in many cases house numbers were just haphazardly chosen, and the postal service was requiring in the 1920s that there be a numbering system that made sense. Well, as the 1950s and 60s came along, there were a lot more people getting mail, and also the system was becoming, they were trying to make it more efficient. So as of July 1st, 1963, so the answer to the question is when did we start using zip codes? Well, all across the country, the Postal Service started using zip codes effective July 1st, 1963. And again, it was a five number five-digit number that would enable postal workers to, by looking at the number, be able to more quickly, was their argument, more quickly get the mail sorted and delivered to the right post office. They were having a lot of issues, frankly, with sometimes penmanship, or people not knowing the right post office. So, for instance, here in East Aurora, before the World War I, we had the Willink and East Aurora post offices, and people sometimes put the wrong one down and it got delivered to the wrong post office. And this was happening quite a bit after World War II. The volume of mail was increasing, so they came up with this system, a zip code, and they used that word zip to make it sound like you could get mail to places quicker. The problem was this is a very foreign concept for people who are using the mail. And today we just put the zip code on, don't we? We don't think twice about it. You have to have the zip code. But imagine you've never used this five-digit number before. And even though there is a method behind the madness that you can look up on Google as to why zip codes are a certain way and why certain communities are assigned a certain number, 14052 here in East Aurora, uh, that people just didn't have the concept of putting a number after the town. And so there was this educational effort that the local postmasters actually were very actively involved in. And they actually put articles in the newspaper, and that Mr. Wright, who happened to be our local postmaster here in East Aurora, actually did a sample address because people didn't know where to put that number. First, they had to remember that number, and then they couldn't remember, they didn't know where to put it. And he had explained that you put it at the end, you put it after the post office, after the town you're sending it to, because people, yeah, okay, we have the zip code, but do we put it after the name? Today we know this. We just automatically do it. It's like riding a bike. We know that you need first that you need a zip code, and you put it after the town. And they had to explain this in the newspaper. And it's kind of interesting to see that there was basically a tutorial on how to use the zip code in the months leading up to the July 1st, 1963 date. I am going to write more about this because this topic seemed like a question that I could just answer on a live stream, but there's so much detail into it that I might write about this in the near future. So be on the lookout for that for more details about it because it's fascinating to me anyway. Um, so zip code comes out. This is what the post office wants. They say it's going to be more efficient. Why would there be controversy? Well, it's interesting. So July 1st, 1963 is when they asked everybody to start using zip codes, and they advertised the number. But a month later, in the August 1st issue of the Easter Advertiser, in an editorial, the publishers were basically blasting the whole system, and they were very skeptical that it was number one working after a month, but that it would work. Um, and they were basically saying that the that it was adding more red tape to a system, a postal service that already had a ton of red tape. Um, and that it was going to cost more money for a postal service that didn't have the money, that was already struggling with money. And in essence, the editors of the Easter Advertiser were claiming in this editorial that it would not be more efficient. That they kind of half jokingly said that the post office had enough trouble getting mail to people with the name on the envelope. How on earth would they get it with a number? And the Postal Service, of course, was saying that a number was easier to decipher, and the numbering system made it easier to get the mail to where it needed to go. Towns could have similar sounding names, but a number would be very direct and much more direct to get the mail to where it needed to go. The following week, there was a call for a retraction of that editorial because from someone who supported the Postal Service, saying that you're not giving this enough time. This system will work if you give it enough time, and that the editorial was not based on fact. But there was a resistance, at least on some people's part, to use this new system, and they thought it was just overkill and that it was putting a burden on your mail carrier and you when you were addressing a letter. So there was sort of a mini controversy over the zip code thing, and even though we take it for granted today, we just do it and see it as a necessity for delivering the mail. This change was very difficult for some people to take. Um, so in the next few months, I did some research. I'm going to do a little bit more is to dig a little deeper into the newspaper archives about it. But they had the Postal Service had a campaign with Mr. Zip, they called it, that basically a cartoon character was used at Christmas time, especially. They talked about there was a sort of a tongue-in-cheek sort of campaign about children uh, and parents using that even Santa Claus used a zip code, and that if Santa Claus used a zip code, we should all be using a zip code in sending letters and knowing how to get to your house. That Santa Claus was using zip codes to get to people's houses on Christmas Eve. Um, One of the things that the Postal Service encouraged during this whole process was not only including the zip code on the mail you're sending, but when you write the return address to make sure you put your zip code on it. And this was important because it was very difficult, or more difficult, to ascertain people's zip codes. Today we can just go online if we don't know a zip code of of a post office or a town. We can just Google it, go on, or the U.S. Postal Service has a website that has all the zip codes, and you can look it up. Back then they wouldn't have had that. You could still look it up, but it was much more difficult than just Googling it. And there was a campaign at Christmas time to get people to start doing that, putting the zip code on their return address. So that way, when they were sending the Christmas cards, the people receiving the cards would have their zip codes. Um, But I just was thinking that too. It might have been a little more difficult to send out your Christmas cards that first year because and include the zip code because you wouldn't have known everybody's zip code if it was outside your town. If you're sending cards out to relatives who live in out of state. So it was a process that even though they were asking everybody to start on July 1st, 1963, it was definitely a process that took time because not everybody knew the zip codes and they weren't necessarily easy to look up. And so the promotional campaign, the educational campaign on behalf of the Postal Service, first to convince people that the zip codes were necessary and to get compliance with people putting the zip codes, um, uh, they that took some time. It wasn't an overnight change. So even though it became effective in July of 1963, it took a lot of time for people to get acclimated for it. And there were a lot of people, according to some of the reports, that if they didn't have the zip code, they just left it off because they were just it was frustrating to try to look it up. But over time, people got used to it. It's just become part of our everyday activities of putting the zip code. When very quickly in the newspaper and advertising, people were putting their zip codes in their advertisements for mail order things. There was on the forms that you would send out, they would include the zip code. So pretty that happened pretty quickly, but over time, for people to get used to it, it took some time. And then, of course, later they added the 4 digits after the zip code, four additional digits, to make it even more into more precise the location of where the mail was being delivered. Not everybody's been using some of those automated mailings that we get have those four extra digits, but that took a longer time for compliance. Probably because it's harder to ascertain that extra 4 digits unless you go online. Um, but everyone knows that if you're in East Aurora, you're probably 14052. You might be on the outskirts with South Wales Post Office or Wales Center or Holland. And this happens across the country in small towns all over. Um, but that extra 4 digits that came later is taking a lot more time to get used to, and a lot of us still don't do it. And the mail still seems to get there. It might take a little longer, but that's when the zip code. To answer the question, the zip codes became effective July 1st of 1963, but it took us a while to get used to it, and there were some people who thought they were unnecessary, and that it was part of unnecessary red tape. So thanks for that question as I was discussing history with somebody. And keep the questions coming. Questions like that. I love questions like that, and I love to be able to research them. And I will be writing more about this again. This topic started out as a small one that I thought I would just answer quickly on the live stream, and now it's turned into a bigger research project. So, and I love that. I think that's a lot of fun. Again, thanks for joining me. Thanks for supporting these video projects. Again, these videos, if Facebook doesn't work for you, they're also available on my YouTube page at Robert Lowell Goller. Check that out. And if you haven't liked or shared or followed this page, please do so. And I'm very thankful for all the support of this project. I see the numbers ticking up each and every week. I was actually quite surprised at the numbers last week and the week before. Very encouraging. So thank you. And thanks for keeping history alive, and we'll see you next time.